What if the most important conversation of your life is the one you're currently avoiding? I've lived 96 years only to realize that my greatest legacy isn't what I built, but the devastating silence I left behind. We trade our truth for temporary calm, never realizing that silence becomes permanent. I'm 96 years old now. When you reach this age, the days grow quieter than you ever imagined they would. The house settles into a kind of stillness which feels different from ordinary silence. It's the kind that comes after most of the people who once filled your life have already gone. You sit with your memories more than you sit with people, and memories have a way of returning to the same moments again and again. Not the big celebrations, not the proud achievements, the conversations you never had. That's the strange thing about living a long life. You begin to see how certain moments mattered far more than you understood at the time. And by the time you realize it, those moments are long gone. I spent most of my life believing that being responsible meant keeping difficult things to myself, that silence was a form of protection. At the time, it felt like the mature thing to do, but I see it differently now. The truth is, the most painful regret in my life isn't something I did, it's something I never said. To understand how that happened, I suppose I have to go back to when I was a younger man. I was 24 when I met my wife, Margaret. She worked at a small bookstore on the corner of Main Street. I still remember the first time I walked in there. I wasn't much of a reader in those days, but the place smelled like paper and old wood, and it felt quiet in a way I liked. Margaret was standing behind the counter, organizing a stack of books. She looked up when the doorbell rang. That was the first time I saw her smile. It wasn't the kind of smile people practice for strangers. It was simple and warm, like she had already decided the world was a decent place to live. We started talking that afternoon about nothing in particular: weather, the town, a book she thought I should read. I came back the next day, and the day after that. Within a year, we were married. Looking back now, those early years were the happiest kind of ordinary life. We rented a small house with creaky floors and thin walls. I worked long hours at a hardware supply warehouse outside town. Margaret kept the house running the way only patient people can. Dinner was always ready around 6. She liked quiet evenings. Sometimes she would read in the living room while I listened to the radio and pretended I understood the news better than I actually did. Life felt steady, predictable, and when you're young, you assume steady things will last forever. Our son, David, was born when I was 30. I remember holding him in the hospital room, the way every new parent does, trying to understand how something so small could suddenly matter more than anything in the world. I promised myself I would be a good father, and in my mind, being a good father meant providing stability. So I worked. Longer hours, more responsibility. The warehouse eventually promoted me to shift supervisor. It wasn't glamorous work, but it paid better, and I took pride in knowing my family would always have what they needed. David grew up the way children do when you're busy living your adult life.
gradually, quietly. One year he needed help tying his shoes. The next year he was riding his bike down the street with the other kids. Margaret was always the one who noticed the small changes first. "David lost his first tooth today," she would tell me. Or, "He drew this picture in school." I listened. I nodded. But most evenings, my mind was still back at the warehouse. That's how it happens sometimes. You think you're present because you're physically in the room, but your attention is somewhere else. Years passed that way. David became a thoughtful boy, quiet like his mother. He asked questions about everything: how engines worked, why the sky changed color in the evening, what made people decide to leave town and start over somewhere else. I answered when I could, but there were also times when I told him we'll talk about it later. Later felt like a harmless word back then. Later felt endless. There was one evening I remember more clearly than most. David must have been about 16. I had come home from a long shift, tired and irritated after dealing with a problem shipment at the warehouse. Margaret was in the kitchen finishing dinner. David was sitting at the table with a piece of paper in front of him. When I walked in, he looked up at me with a kind of nervous excitement. He said, "I got accepted." He slid the paper across the table. It was a letter from a university art program in another state. One of his teachers had recommended him. They had offered him a place in their fall class. I remember reading the letter slowly. Art, painting, drawing. None of those things made much sense to the practical part of my mind back then. All I could think about was distance, tuition, uncertainty, the kind of future that didn't come with guarantees. I folded the letter and handed it back to him. I told him that kind of path is risky. You should think about something more stable. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't insult him. To me, it felt like reasonable advice, the kind of thing a responsible father would say. David sat quietly for a moment. Then he nodded. He said, "Okay." He never mentioned the program again. At the time, I believed the conversation was finished, just another practical decision in a long line of practical decisions parents make for their children. But the truth is, that conversation was only the beginning of something much larger. I just didn't realize it yet. If you'd like, I can continue the rest of the story.
The years moved forward after that the way they usually do, quietly. David finished high school and stayed in town. He enrolled in the local college and studied business administration. It was a sensible degree, the kind that led to predictable work. At the time, that seemed like a good outcome. He found a job at a small insurance office after graduation. The pay wasn't extraordinary, but it was steady, and steady had always been the thing I trusted most. Margaret was proud of him. I was proud too, though I rarely said it out loud. That's another habit you don't notice while you're young. You assume people already know what you feel. You assume there will always be time to say the things that matter later. David moved into a small apartment across town when he was 26. He came by the house on Sundays sometimes. Margaret would cook a large meal, and we'd sit around the table the way we had when he was a boy. The conversations were comfortable, but they were also careful. Work, weather, bills, The small things people talk about when they don't quite know how to reach the deeper parts of the conversation. Every now and then I would notice him looking around the living room. His eyes would pause on the old bookshelf near the window. There were sketchbooks sitting there, ones he had used when he was younger. Margaret had saved them. Sometimes he would flip through them quietly while we talked. I remember thinking it was a pleasant kind of nostalgia. I didn't realize it might have been something else. Years passed. David married a woman named Claire. She was thoughtful and patient, the kind of person who listens carefully when other people speak. They had a daughter a few years later, my granddaughter, Lily. By that time, I was already slowing down a little. The warehouse work had taken its toll on my back, and I eventually retired when I was 65. Retirement is strange at first. For decades, your days are organized around responsibility. Then suddenly, there's space where those responsibilities used to be. That's when you start noticing things you ignored before. One afternoon, not long after I retired, David came by the house to help me repair a loose railing on the front porch. We worked quietly for a while, tightening screws and replacing a cracked board. When the job was finished, we sat down in two old chairs and watched the street for a while. Children were riding their bikes along the sidewalk. It was one of those calm afternoons where nothing particularly important seems to be happening. But sometimes those are the moments when important things could be said. David looked older than I remembered noticing before. Not old, just settled, like someone who had been carrying responsibilities for a long time. And suddenly, without warning, I thought about that letter again. The art program, the way he stood at the table waiting for my answer. I felt something heavy settle in my chest. For the first time, I wondered whether my practical advice had quietly changed the direction of his life. I almost said it then. I almost told him that maybe I had been too quick to dismiss something that mattered to him. But the words felt awkward after so many years. So instead, we talked about his job, about Lily starting school soon. The conversation drifted back into the safe territory we always used, and that moment passed. Moments pass easily like that. You barely notice them leaving. Years later, David began having trouble with his health. It started with fatigue, then chest pain that came and went. Doctors ran tests. Appointments were scheduled. Life became a series of cautious conversations about medication and rest. Through it all, David remained the same calm person he had always been. He still visited when he could. We still talked about ordinary things. But every now and then I would see him looking at something with the quiet attention he once gave to those sketchbooks. Once I asked him if he still drew. He smiled. "Not much anymore," he said. The way he said it stayed with me. There was no bitterness in his voice, just acceptance, and somehow that made it harder. The morning he died was ordinary. That's how these things often happen. Claire called me early. Her voice was steady, but I could hear the exhaustion underneath it. David had suffered a heart attack during the night. He was 68 years old. I remember sitting in the same living room where he once showed me that letter. The house was quiet in the way houses become quiet when something final has happened. At the funeral, people spoke about his reliability, his kindness,
the way he was always there when someone needed help. All of those things were true. But while I sat there listening, one thought kept returning to me. I never told him. I never told my son that I might have been wrong. I never told him that I sometimes wondered what his life might have looked like if I had encouraged that dream instead of redirecting it. Maybe it wouldn't have changed anything. Maybe he still would have chosen the same path, but he would have known something important. He would have known that his father believed in the things that made him feel alive. That's the sentence I carried for years without saying, and now there's no place left to say it. That's the strange cruelty of time. When you're young, silence feels temporary. You think the conversation can always happen tomorrow, but silence, when repeated long enough, becomes permanent. Now I'm 96 years old. Most of the people who once shared my life are gone. The house is quiet most days. Sometimes in the afternoon sunlight, I sit near the window and think about that evening at the kitchen table. David standing there with a piece of paper in his hands, waiting. It was such a small moment, just a father and a son deciding what kind of future felt safest. But sometimes the smallest conversations carry the greatest weight. If you're listening to this, I'm not here to tell you what choices to make. Life is complicated, and every family has its own story. But I will say one thing. The words we hesitate to say today can become the silence we regret tomorrow, and time has a way of moving faster than we expect. If this story meant something to you, you're welcome to share your thoughts. I don't need anything from it. At my age, most of the things a man once chased have already passed by. But perhaps this story can sit quietly with someone for a while. Because the truth is, some conversations matter more than we realize while we still have the chance to speak them.